Okay, we are live. Welcome everyone to the Frightening Floyds podcast. Today it's just Jacob Floyd. Jenny's not here today. Right now this week we have author Marcus Cook. He is an author with Nightmare Press, which is our press that we run. And he just recently released, is this your first book, Marcus? I believe you said it is your first book.
First one, yep.
A Chance in Hell, an Ava Edison heist. It's the first in a series, and I believe it came out on August 23rd. So it's been out just a
Yep.
a little over a month. So far, how's that experience been for you, Marcus?
It's been great. It's amazing to have that feeling of just having seeing the book there is for sale and getting people's reviews, the people telling me if they like it or not like it, and it's been awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely good to hear feedback on that stuff. I know it's it's difficult to get reviews when you do the indie publishing, but also, I mean, I think the top priority is just to more or less get it exposed. Like it's better if you can just get it onto people who will talk about it as opposed to just someone popping a review on Amazon. Because unless you're getting like thousands upon thousands of reviews, they don't always make a difference. But I mean, they can, but
Right.
I think it's better to just get more people to hear about it. So it was quite the process getting this book out. I know that I remembered something had happened. The lady who edited it used a different program than I used, and it ended up causing a whole bunch of formatting errors that I had to go back and
Right.
fix. But I finally figured out how to do it in one fell swoop, so that definitely hurried things along. But I guess it was worth it. So we got over that bump. So, what made you, first of all, well, tell us a little bit about yourself. What made you want to start writing, and what made you come up with Ava?
Um, I started writing since I was 8 years old. I think one of the very first things I wrote was actually I rewrote Poltergeist as an 8-year old. I saw the movie and like, oh my goodness, I want to make this. It wasn't children friendly. I rewrote this as a child Poltergeist. Um, from there, I wrote. I have a couple. I wrote a couple of plays that were produced on local theater. I have a award-winning published play. Um, I continued to try to write movie scripts. And then I was writing stories in high school, and instead of homework, I'd write stories and bring them to work school for people to read. Um, After that, I did do some indie films, nothing like huge, just right in the point where before YouTube and all that came out, where you had to knock on the door and ask people for money. But it was a fun experience doing that. And then from there, I did a little bit of puppet stuff, and my wife kept telling me, "Hey, why aren't you writing? The puppet stuff's okay, it's cute, but your thing is writing." So, um, we had a little bit of an argument, and I was going to prove her wrong because I said I just don't have any writing in me anymore. And I found a short story, anthology looking for a short story. I wrote a story, sent it in, and it was accepted and published. And I showed her that who was right. um, the short story that I wrote was called Ava Edison and the Burning Man. It was the first story, very first short story published was Ava, and from there I got a lot of good feedback, especially on Amazon. I mean, there was 12 authors in this anthology, and my short story got 6 or 7 reviews just solely, independently from that on Amazon about Ava and how much they liked the character and really want to know more about Mary. And so I went on. I wrote about 36 horror short stories, in different anthologies, and then finally, I thought it was time to write a book. I really wanted to write a book, and I figured the character of the right would be Ava. I thought she had the biggest voice in my head, and I started writing the book.
Yeah, Ava was certain. It's Chance in Hell. One of the things I really liked about it is that it has that sort of seamless narration, and it's for a heist type story. It flows really quickly, and I think that's important for something like that. And it's obvious by the writing that you had that story in your head for a long time, and you're very familiar with Ava. So what sort of inspired Ava? What do you think about when you're writing her, thinking of her?
Um, I'm a big fan of Indiana Jones and Lara Croft, and I really always enjoyed strong um, female characters. And I think Ava kind of somehow formed that. I actually Ava started in a contest. There was a New York Midnight contest, and I had to write a story about. And they give you like three things. They give you it had to be an action. It had to be have like a dock in it and like paintball. And I had to put all three in there. And I woke up the next day, and Ava was just in my head about this girl. This, and back then she was just a ex-military but she's still a single mom. And this was before I even added the Mary element to it, the paranormal element to it. And I really liked the strong character. And I just for some reason she just kept in my head, and I just kept thinking about this character. How when I wrote the short story, I really loved the short story, and I put a lot into the short story, and especially with Mary. I think Mary had a lot to do with me writing the book because I think that chemistry between those characters was really good.
Yeah, I'm when it comes to writing short stories, I'm not great at it. I always end up writing something that requires more, and I often end up thinking of long stories to add to that. So I can kind of see where the idea to build an entire series based on one short story comes from. I think the comparison to like Indiana Jones and Laura Croft is a pretty good comparison. Only kind of add the occult bit to it. What as far as Mary goes, what do you think she came from, or do you ever plan on diving more into her story or writing something
Um,
separate for her?
I'm actually working on book two of Ava, and this one has a stronger Mary background to it. I have a lot of cool stuff with Mary. Mary, I definitely wanted to even flesh out more. People really were from reviews and people talking to me. Mary was the character everybody still really liked next to Ava. And they really liked the combination of the two and how they banter. Um, Mary, I actually based her on a real historical person, and I thought she was very interesting. The Mary was a 19th century thief, and just really was an interesting character I read about, and I thought it'd be interesting to base her on my character.
So now you mentioned you were writing, you had written plays and screenplays and such. What do you think differs between what for you is different about writing a full-on novel as opposed to being writing scripts and plays? Do you think there's more limitation to the screenplays, or does the
Um,
book allow for more evolving?
it's really hard. It was really hard for me to do like go from screenplay to writing a novel because I started writing a novel like a screenplay where I put in too much description. I would do the direction like I would have in for the early edits and stuff. I would have like Ava woke up and walked to the door and made breakfast. Where it was just I wasn't flowing. I was writing it like a script in a story form. But I think the hard part was knowing it is limited in a screenplay because screenplay you have to give that direction and idea where you're putting it and tell about what's going on. Where a story lets if you write it right, it lets the reader have more imagination of what's going on. And I mean, you don't have to say that Ava got up and went to the had a walk to the bathroom. You see Ava was in the bathroom, she at some point got up and went to the bathroom type of deal.
Yeah, yeah. You don't have to put every step she takes on there. You already know she's going where she's going. I think a lot of people. I don't know. I feel like screenplays writers don't get enough respect. I think I don't know. To me, it seems like it would be very difficult to sort of take one whole story and condense it into something that's like what are they usually about 120 pages, and
Yeah.
and they don't, and they're not even like full pages because you got to like put the scene up here and then the dialogue, and then I don't know. To me, it seems very like an art form that just is underappreciated. Whereas everybody's like, well, writing a book that's got to be difficult, which I think writing a screenplay it seems like it would be more difficult.
Well, it's because I mean, you really have to think. I mean, you have to do a lot of dialogue. I mean, you don't have to have as much dialogue in a book if you don't want. Where a screenplay, you have to have people talking all the time um, within things. Yeah, it's difficult to make to do that to have a flow, the creative flow in a screenplay compared to a book. I think.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people. Some I don't really believe much in like all the writing rules that you see people throw around as far as writing novels. But there are a lot of people who think that the less dialogue in a novel is better. Um, I don't know if I really necessarily agree with that. I mean, I've read some books that have a lot of dialogue and it's well written dialogue and it's realistic and it moves the story along and it's good. But then I've read some that just has very unrealistic dialogue, very blocky dialogue. So, I mean, when it comes to the art of writing dialogue, what is your approach?
Um, well, I grew up reading Elmer Leonard, who's probably one of the kings of writing dialogue in his book. His books are more dialogue based than uh, everything else. Um, Make it real. I like writing dialogue that people believe that they actually have that conversation. That you can have the same conversation with your friend, and you're reading a book where you're saying, "Oh, that's you want to believe the characters are actually talking to each other, not not some kind of fake type of thing. Not fake, but just forced. Where this
Yeah.
you want like natural talk.
Yeah, I was having actually that conversation with Dixon, the guy who does some of our promotional stuff, reaches out to the bloggers and everything today about dialogue, and he was talking about the how he had to improve his dialogue, and that's pretty much the same conversation I had with him. I said, when I try to write dialogue, I just try to make it like realistic, like people would talk to one another, how I talk to people or how I've observed others talking to each other, and I was like, one thing I don't like is like in books where you'll see like just randomly someone will go on this long speech, and it's like that rarely ever happens. Like if you don't really need a speech like that in a lot of books. Now sometimes it will require maybe somebody to grandstand for a minute, but you got to kind of create the right environment for that. Like if people are just out having coffee, they're not some guy's not likely going to stand up and give this life altering speech. But yeah, but if you can create like a situation that's kind of high in emotion and high intensity involving a group of people, usually if someone gets real emotional and has a breakdown and starts going into a speech, the other people might listen just to kind of get to know what's going on. So yeah, I think if you're going to write dialogue, realistic dialogue is important. And I think a lot of the problems with like the classic books is they did kind of write unrealistic dialogue. But I don't know. I wasn't alive back then. Maybe they sat around and talked to each other that way. I don't know. But so now with your indie film experiences, did you ever direct or did you just write or what was
I
your?
directed. I directed and I wrote my films. Um, I was a good director. I wasn't a great director. Once again, my wife's like, even when I did films, my wife's like, why aren't you just writing? Why don't you sell your script and and be the writer, not to be the director? But I was always the person that wants to do everything. I mean, I grew up. I really enjoy like Tarantino, and I enjoyed Kevin Smith. Because they did it all by themselves, and
Mhm.
once again, dialogue kings. And
Yeah,
that's the other thing about dialogue is you watch those type of things, and you're like, oh, I should write like I the first couple of drafts of that I did a lot more with maybe Kevin Smith type of discussions where it was like very pulpy and I mean there's some pulp in there now, but I always like you're not Kevin Smith, Marcus. This is not Marcus Cook writing. This is Marcus trying to be Kevin Smith.
yeah,
That's another thing that's hard to do, and you're influenced by so many people, and you want like, well, this is what's popular. I want to write like this, and um, it takes a minute to find yourself, and I think that's what makes the book good is that somebody can read it and not say, "Oh, this is Kevin Smith's ripoff. This is a Marcus Cook novel."
Yeah, I think that's important too. It's one thing to be influenced. Like, I mean, when I would publish books before with other people, they would be like, or when I would just show up on platforms, they would try to be like, well, you should talk about your influences. And I'm just like, there's people I like, but I don't really know how many of them are actually influences of me. So I would just like list random people as my influences. But with Kevin Smith, I feel like it's his first three films, the Jersey trilogy, I believe, is what they
Right.
kind of refer to him as. Clerks, Mallrats, and Chasing Amy, especially Chasing Amy. I think there's some of the best films of the '90s, and they're more than like the comedy is raunchy and it's ridiculous at times, but it's realistic. Like, and then you go from those first two to Chasing Amy, which to me is just a brilliant film, and I think one of the best films ever made. And I don't think a lot of people really credit it for just the depth of character development and storytelling that was. So I feel like you can be influenced by something like that without actually trying to write like them. So I get what you're saying. I've been influenced by certain people, and I found myself when I was younger just rewriting. Tolkien being one of them. Like, I had a fantasy series I've been thinking about writing for 30 years, and the early stuff, I just found it was just so derivative of his work, and I've just kind of pushed it off to the side. And so you got to kind of find your own voice within your influences, I think, and I feel like that you did that well with A Chance in Hell. So I was going to ask how you apply what you learned with indie filmmaking to writing, but you really just answered that question already by kind of like applying your influence and voice. So another thing about the indie filmmaking, so I'm guessing you were probably doing this in the early 2000s and
Yeah.
such, maybe.
Late '90s, early 2000s. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that was definitely a time before crowdfunding and YouTube.
Right.
YouTube has really made, and just the other platforms has really made it. I don't want to say easier necessarily because you still got to put in the work and you still got to be good at what you do, but it's made it more open. It's created more opportunity for creative people, and especially to bypass the gatekeepers so that they don't just control what's on television or what. So
Right.
that leads me to the idea of social media platforms and being involved as an author. I've noticed you are very much involved in the sense where like you want to get out there and promote your book and you want to do book signings, and that's something I'm always telling authors they have to be involved if they can. Some of them cannot, and I understand that, but if you can, you should. So I know you missed a signing because of the shipping issues. um, I really hate that happened, but thank God they've shipped your books. So tell us about some. You said you had a signing coming up, so you booked a signing and right.
Yep. I can't think very. It's gonna be it's in Old Brooklyn. It's a really cool. I can't think of the called right off the top of my head. It's like a goth. It's like a goth shop. It's not a bookshop, but oh wait, I got it right here. It is uh, Miscreant and the Muse on Pearl Road in Old Brooklyn here, where I live in Cleveland. And it's like a goth shop, like especially with Halloween. So there's a lot of really cool stuff, like goth type of stuff, like skulls and all that. And they just opened, and I contacted them, and they think the book fits perfectly, and they've been getting a lot of traffic, and they think that they're really excited about joining together and doing this book signing over there.
Yeah, that's another thing. Thinking outside the box, and Jenny's really good about that. For us, it's not always just bookstores you can go to. You can go to shops. A lot of local shops are good about that, depending on where you're from. I live in the Louisville area, so there's a lot of local shops and a lot of artists and authors and stuff out here, and they're real big on doing that sort of thing. So we're gonna hopefully get you into some more places soon. Do you all have like a Barnes and Noble out there near you, or a half
There's a
price
couple.
books? Yeah. Do you
Yeah,
have a
we
half?
have both.
Those are good places to go. Half price books. Do you all have that near you out there?
We do. and for some reason they're like, we don't do out here in Cleveland. They don't do book signings.
Oh, that's weird. Yeah, because we used to do a lot of the stores in Indiana and the one out here by us. They were real big about it. But I mean, I've heard horror stories about authors not behaving well in some of these places, and that kind of ruins it for author etiquette is a big thing of mine too that I try to push. I've been to events and just seen people be really rude to potential readers, and I've heard stories about how they act up in stores because they get mad because they don't sell any books, and it's like that's really not the store's fault, you know. So
Right.
um, yeah, and they do
I
kind of.
think I think that that's where my indie movie writing came from. The indie filmmaker, because you have to be really like thick skin when you're doing indie movies because it's hard. Once again, it's hard to get them in or even out there. I mean, now it's much easier with media now, but back then it's hard to try to sell it and stuff like that. And I think I've really taken that with selling the book, and I know that it's going to be hard. And the Cleveland area is it's awesome. It's full of so many talented people, but it's a very competitive thing, and it's hard to work with get together with all their authors and stuff. It's very solo, and
Yeah.
but it's fun. And like I said, I'm really enjoying that. I'm a very outgoing person. I'm a seller. I want people to know and hopefully read the book. And I know that I have to sell myself to do it. You can't. It's just not gonna. You can't just put it on Amazon and say, "Oh, there it is," and go ahead and buy it. You gotta let people know it's there.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing, and it's very important whether you self-publish or you're published with an indie press or a big press. It doesn't matter because big four slash big five presses are the same. You know, you still as the author, no one can sell your book better than you can because no one knows it better than you can. I mean, you could get like a marketing master could learn your book, but then you're paying out the wazoo for one of those. But it's important to get out there and say, hey, seek out the platforms that you can. And because the publisher, like as a publisher, one thing I learned is, you got, and I knew this back when I'd been published by other publishers that, we can push as much as we can, but it's like we got this book here and this book here. We have to do it for all of them, whereas the author can just look at their own book and do it. So, author involvement is very important, and I like when people like you, having authors like you who understand that, and because not just because it helps the press, but I want to see the authors succeed for themselves. And I can't always stress it enough how much they have to be involved with their own work. Even John Grisham said when he first started out, he bought 1,000 copies of his books and sold them out of his trunk. So, and he was with a big five company. I think it was like big six back then. So you got to put in the work, and that's important. And I guess that's one thing you learn from doing the indie film industry.
I don't know. I just recently I just saw James Patterson at a library out here in Cleveland, and I mean, I was like shocked. Like James Patterson is doing a library talk, and also, but that's it. He's still at the point. He doesn't know how big. He still gets out there to sell his next book. He's not letting his name just be like out there. He's out promoting what he's doing.
Yeah, because he doesn't need the money. That's obviously true. But he just, I mean, he probably likes what he does. And I know a lot of people. I don't know. He catches flack from some people, but I mean, I look at James Patterson as a guy who's like always working. Like they say, well, he puts his name on books that other people write, and I'm like, no, he's helping authors you don't know
Right.
elevate themselves. So he gives back to the community, and I think I'm not surprised too much that he would come out and talk to people because he's just seems like a guy who cares about what he does, and I think he's a good example. People should probably be like, yeah, even though he's a multimillionaire, he's still out here. Stephen King did the same thing. He still goes on
Right.
book tours, and he was out here in Louisville, I don't know, 8 years back or so at Carmichael's bookstore, and that's a small independent bookstore. There's like two stores out here in Louisville, and he showed up there and did a talk. He doesn't need to. My God, he's one of the
Right.
most well-known authors of all time. So I think that's good examples of authors being involved, even though they don't have to be. So if they are still doing it, then unknowns like us, we need to still be out there
Right.
doing it, you know. Um, so you, I thought I heard you say something about you did puppet stuff. Is that right? I want to hear more
I was
about
always
that.
um when I was, a huge Jim Henson fan always. I grew up loving puppets and playing with puppets. And one day I had this horror puppet head, and I thought I would love to do a talk show, and I made this puppet into a, like, his character was an 80s rock star like now. So I mean, he was drunk, he was a womanizer, he looked like he had way too many drinks and too many drugs in the past.
So it's
They
Steven
made him
Tyler essentially, right?
yes. It was his name was Richard Crawdaddy, and what we did is we interviewed bands and stuff, and it started small, and then I started really getting some big bands. And I mean, I did like a Real Housewife from New Jersey. I got um
That's cool. Which housewife did you get?
Melissa from Melissa
Okay,
Gorgon.
is that the? I'm trying to remember because my wife used to watch that one, and I actually enjoyed that show. And I remember Teresa, and I remember a lot of their faces, but I can't remember their names. And they were an interesting bunch, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun to meet them in person. I did Miley's brother who was in town. I got him. I did Cannibal Corpse release
Oh
here.
wow,
We did a lot of metal things. We did a lot of concerts. It was really cool. I did it for about 3 years, and it got old. I mean, MTV actually was talking to me for a minute. It was just at the birth of, once again, I was always knocking on the door right there. It was on the birth of streaming, so MTV was just starting their streaming, and they were looking for stuff, and it just never really you know went on from there. And like I said, the character, I just got bored with the character. It really was just being a big drunk puppet all the time, and 3 years is a long time for it. So I
yeah,
just and in between, my wife was just like, "This is nice, Marcus. It's great. It's fun, but you should be writing."
yeah. I guess if something's not working out, move on to something else, right?
Right.
That's pretty interesting. Cannibal Corpse. You want to talk about horror writers? Good lord, those guys' songs are horror shorts. They come up with some insane things. They're
I was
definitely have.
surprised. I was just surprised. Like, I mean, some of the people that said yes to this, me doing this interviews, was like, wow, and it was really cool.
Yeah. You ever thought about
And Warped
maybe?
Tour.
Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe you should try a YouTube channel and do that and do some puppet work on there.
Oh no, that was on YouTube. I
Oh,
did.
it
I did.
was.
Yeah, I did that on. I did have that on YouTube.
Well, that's cool. Yeah, sometimes some things just run their course, and if you don't go anywhere with them, you're kind of like you feel like moving on to the next endeavor. I've kind of always just been about writing. Like I've used to think about like trying to be a filmmaker, but I can't imagine everything that goes into that. I've seen, on the indie levels what some people do, and I don't think I could be a film director. Y'all have to do.
Oh,
Y'all have to do a
yeah,
lot.
it was tough. It's way too. It's grueling. Because you're trying to do. You're working with. I mean, Cleveland area has a lot of indie filmmakers, and once again, it's cutthroat. People don't. If I always try to make people work together, I'm like, oh, we should get together and collaborate and really work on this, and it was really hard to do that. And I actually, I was working on a movie called Dead Planet. And it was going to be. It was actually in Fangoria hadn't talked about it back in the day. People, I would wear the shirts to horror conventions and people, promoting and stuff, and people would recognize it from the magazine and stuff. I had a lot of the actors, like Michael Berryman, Richard Bannister, Reggie Bannister, stuff like that attached to it. I was really, and it was kind of a combination of Star Wars meets Mad Max.
Well, that
Um,
sounds cool.
yeah, and we got to the point. And I actually had at the time there was a soap opera actress that was doing the lead. She was actually lived in Cleveland, and so we decided to do is wasn't we weren't getting the funding, so we thought about doing a short film, basically a premiere, uh, like a pre, before type of deal. And we were filming it, and one day my wife had gotten, and I put hours and hours. I mean, it's 12 hours days, not getting paid. You're just doing what you have. It's not like you're making money. You're doing it around taking vacation time and stuff to do it. And my wife had gotten sick and it's pneumonia. And one thing, my wife is big, big. I couldn't do things without my wife. She's the biggest supporter I have here. And she had called me when I had just wrapped up the last days of filming, and she said, "Oh, honey, I can't breathe. Can you come home?" And we had wrapped up, and we were cleaning up. I said, "Hey, I gotta go to the hospital. My wife is, needs to go to the hospital. Maybe she can't breathe." Everyone's like, "Go, go, go!" And the guy who funded this thing, which was not a lot of funding money, but it was, But next day I came in, and he told me that he didn't want me on the project anymore because my wife was more important than the film.
Well, of course, of course she
And I'm
is.
like, well, you know what? I said, well, good luck trying to make this movie because we have a contract that says this is mine. You can do whatever, you can keep it, but you can't sell it. And it really was. That's where I stopped writing for a minute because I was just heartbroken.
Yeah, that
Um,
guy sounds like a real ass.
yeah, it was tough. I got blackballed really bad out here because of that. Like people blamed me, and there was rumors about me, and
Well,
that's why I stopped writing. I really I shut down with I didn't want to write anymore because this wasn't fair, and I was writing stories on instead of writing short stories or stories, I was writing scripts, and I think that's where I stopped. And my wife's like, don't write scripts anymore, write stories.
yeah. Well, I mean, I can certainly relate to people trying to blackball you and spreading rumors about you and lies and get mad at you. I can relate to that, but I'm not going to talk about it because I could probably talk for 4 or 5 hours about that. Anybody,
But you know
anybody,
what? You have a good project or something if really people want it. You're doing something right, and some people are if there's never bad press. They say
yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like a lot of the people I butted heads with, they went around. They have a history of behaving that way with several different people. And after about the third or fourth time they tried it with me, a whole bunch of people just started following everything I was doing because they were like, well, "I'm sick of listening to these people. All they do is complain, and they're complaining about you. But I come over here, and all you do is talking about the projects you're working on, and not bothering all that nonsense." So, yeah, I mean, I get it, but and it can really take you out. It can make you feel bad and make you question yourself. But I mean, if you got the artistic drive, you can't give it up. And you just maybe it was for the best that that guy was a jerk because now you're writing books and you seem really to enjoy the Ava Edison books. So I mean, it's not good what happened to your wife. Obviously, I'm glad she's okay, but you learned what kind of guy he was, and then you learned what kind of
Right.
community you were around. So you moved on, and hopefully this all works out better for you. So
No, I love writing. This is great. I love the fact that I got published, and it makes me. I'm excited. I'm really excited about continuing, writing and make sure, even if I was. I mean, right now it's still a hobby. I mean, I still have to do life and stuff, but it's fulfillment. I get a lot out of it.
I think that's important too, because I mean, even if I don't, there's some people who like to sit and say, "Oh, you can't make money writing," blah blah blah. Yes, you can. It's very difficult to make a living writing these days, even if you get signed. Even if you land an agent and get signed with Penguin and stuff like that, there's plenty of people who don't make livings off of it. But if it's fulfilling and you enjoy it, that's really what's important. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 something years and I'm still who am I, right? No one knows who I am. So I mean, but I love it and I enjoy doing it, and I'm glad to help people like you and some of our other authors who really just enjoy writing, and I think that's important. A lot of people just are like, "Oh, I'm not happy writing anymore because I haven't reached my goals," and it's like, well, it's good to set goals, but they don't have to be definitive. I mean, if you enjoy the ride, I think
Yeah, I
that's.
think my goal was to get you know was to get published and start with a short story. And next goal was, hey, let's work on a novel. Now it's, hey, let's do the next novel. Can let's just continue the story. Let's see if we can continue the story.
Yep. Well, yeah. Let's just keep it going. I've seen that some of the reviews you got, and people have positive things to say about it, and which is good. I had positive thoughts about it, which is why we signed you, and making it happen. So you said something earlier that I thought was interesting that got my attention. You were talking about you rewrote the Poltergeist film when you were younger. Um, have you ever done that with anything else, or was it just Did you write it like a book story, or did you screenplay rewrite it?
I love the screenplay. I was actually going to send it to Steven Spielberg and say, "Hey, can we do this? This is better." I mean, I was 8 years old. I didn't, but I would write. It was great because I would write the stories, and my dad would type them for me and send them back, for me. Um, yeah, no, I thought that it needed more dialogue. I thought the dialogue wasn't real, and 8 years old, here I'm thinking about dialogue, and I
Yeah.
actually I had Carol Ann not like tomatoes. That was the whole, and instead of the meat section, I had a tomato attack Carol Ann.
Yeah, well, you could write dialogue too that wasn't all spoken in whispers. Like they had that one scene that went on forever where they're just whispering to each other, and it's like,
Right.
dude, what are you afraid you're gonna do? Wake up the ghosts? I mean, they're But I remember Family Guy made fun of that on an episode where they're like, why are we whispering? They're just going on and on. But no, I think that's interesting because it's kind of like how fanfic works for people. You've got something you like and you write. And I think it's a good writing exercise too. I used to do it a lot, and you find films that you liked, and so you kind of just rewrite them or add on to them. And I remember I wrote this elaborate ending, different ending, alternate ending to The Outsiders when I was like 14. I did it as a project in school, and I remember the teacher was like, "This is so good! Like, I like this better than the ending that S.E. Hinton wrote." I was just kind of like, "Well, that's neat," but that did kind of spark my interest to write more, and I think that's good. And you go look how it worked for what's her name, E.L. Gray or E.L. Fudge. What's her name?
Yeah, I remember. I know you're talking about.
Yeah, I wrote the Twilight bondage fan fiction that became 50 Shades of Grey.
All right. Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, you never know what might. I mean, look how many people write H.P. Lovecraft stories.
Right.
So it definitely makes for um, an interesting writing exercise. So, other than rewriting screenplays, are there any other kind of writing exercises that you uh, practiced over the years that's kind of helped you get your creative flow?
I I was a part of for a few, and I just rejoined it. But I'm part of a writing group, and that was great because they would give you a thing to write, and then just having to write. You have like 3 weeks to write this short story. So that was really made the juices flow and different types of stories and how to really throw. I mean, you might have to write a romance one day and a horror movie next. I think at one point we had to combine two different opposite. Like I think it had to be like romance horror. We had to take two different genres and mix them together. So the writing group really helped me um, write and get my style, and also get the feedback from it's great to hear different authors feeding back on what you're writing and knowing what to work on and not to work on. Um,
Yeah,
other than that, I mean, I like the challenges. I like even when I wrote short stories, I would look for short stories that were different. It wasn't they weren't looking for. I mean, I actually have a book that went into space. I wrote a short story for this Area 51 anthology, and a couple months ago, it was on a rocket to go to the moon, and the rocket broke and crashed back. But it was in space and was heading for the moon. It was part of the thing, so that was cool to have that, and it was a connection. It was the stories that all went together. So you were told that here's your story, and then your story would be either the beginning of Area 51 or at the end. So it was really cool. It was really a good connection.
that is really cool. Too bad the rocket didn't make it,
Yeah.
right? So, as far as Ava is concerned, where do you plan on going next with her?
Forward. No, I have so many. I mean, so many ideas and things I want her to steal, or like I said, like right now, this one is kind of about her. About her, once again, Ava's a character where she's a single mom. Also, that's what makes her interesting. She's not just this thief. She's a single mom, and this is the career she's chosen to raise her daughter. And so I enjoy aging like her. In the next book, her daughter's went from 13 to 16, so she has to deal with a 16-year-old also, and then once again she has some amazing job she has to go try to pull off.
Are we ever going to see any mother-daughter heist episodes? Do you think?
Well, I do. I mean, there was a little bit of it in chance she
Hmm.
does with her daughter. Um, but yeah, I definitely. At one point I think I want her daughter to try to do one by herself, and which can Ava's going to have to bail her out on it.
Yeah, hey, that's the good thing about when you're writing series like that, and you have those elements in place. You're always putting more, possibilities for other stories along the way. Was that something you planned on doing when you started writing this, or did it just happen accidentally?
I just happened accidentally. I mean, after I wrote, because I didn't want to get too far. I mean, yeah, I never knew if it was going to be published, and I'm like, I don't want to continue to just write all these books and nothing happen. I mean, it's fun to write, but if it doesn't make it, I have so many other books to write and or characters in my that I in my head. But Ava right now has been really strong. I just wake up and or it's really weird as a writer, and you just hear the voices,
Yep.
and you're like, and that's why the people are like, why, how do how do you write? I said, well, I just answered the voices in my head, and I guess if I wasn't a writer, that would be kind of weird.
And then they're like, "What do you mean?" Yeah, no, that's yeah. Unless you have that urge to write, you don't really understand what goes through a writer's head and what goes through our heads all the time. Just driving around. For me, I can just be driving around and I see any little thing. It gives me this weird. I have intrusive thoughts anyway, so and they lead to a lot of stories. And I'll think the weirdest things. I'll see something out, and I'm not going to give any examples, but I mean, like I'll see something and I'll think, what if this was going on? And then that just leads to a whole bunch of other stuff that turns into story ideas that I begin and only get a little way into before moving on to another story idea. But so you mentioned the possibility of other characters or like other stories. Do you have any like ideas outside of the Ava Edison universe going around in there?
I actually have one that I'm actually writing also right now called Sin, which is about it's actually it was a short story I wrote, a published short story, and then another character I like to expand. But she's a high school assassin, and
Oh, cool.
and she has to deal with high school life and being an
And being an
assassin.
assassin. I once had an idea similar to that about a cheerleader who was forced into a situation where she had to embark on strange journeys, but I never really went forward with it. But so I'm definitely interested in seeing that. Did you write it like, is it sin or sin with like an apostrophe short for assassin? Is that how?
No, it just been Sin, but her name is Cinny. So it's for there's many versions. I mean, many things to this the word sin in it. Part of her name, what she's doing. I actually do have a priest that she talks to. Um, and it's another funny banter because this priest, the thing she tells this priest, and he can't do anything about it. And he's like, "Well, I'm not confessing."
Yeah.
So never admit that she's the way she talks is like it's she's not actually confessing, but she's telling you what's going on.
Be like, this is
I
what's
mean, it's a
happening.
fun. I'm looking
She's like, I'm not saying I'm doing it, but this is what's happening.
right.
kind of deal. Well, yeah, like that's the thing. That's what I was getting at. Like you talking about all the different ways you can say sin. Sin also being the last three letters of the word assassin. So, which is kind of
That's it.
which is kind of interesting. Um, so when do you see, like, when you start thinking of like forward thinking with the Ava Edison universe, how far do you think you can see it going, or is it just you're just going to write it? Do you have an end in sight, or do you just going to keep going with it until you run out of ideas?
Right now, I have 5 books planned.
Okay.
I think I can write five. The other day, book three really came to me. It was like no, and I had to leave notes for myself so I don't forget it. But I'm like, I'm not done with two, but I already had like, oh, I walked past in Cleveland. We have actually a submarine outside out in Lake Erie. That's it's still a real submarine, but it's not it's decommissioned. But I'm like, Ava would love to steal that. Like how can I use her to so that's how I walk around now. I'm like, huh, what can Ava, I think Ava wants to break into the rock hall and steal like Taylor Swift's guitar.
That would be cool. That would be a cool one, definitely. Um, then you just have to be careful, I guess, using. Well, she probably wouldn't carry it if she knew, right? So that would be kind of neat.
I use Taylor's in Chance. She talks about Taylor all the time in Chance.
Yeah, that's true. That's yep. I guess as long as you don't actually write her as a character, I guess it's okay. So, all right.
Right.
So that actually was kind of like what you said about the submarine, was kind of like where I was going to go with my next question. As far as you said you live in Cleveland, so obviously, yeah, there's a lot there. It's, I've not been to Cleveland, but I've been to, other cities that are sort of like it. And of course, I live in Louisville, which is highly populated and has a lot going on. So how often do you find like living in an area like that just influences, like your city influences your stories?
A lot. I threw it, I threw it a little bit of Cleveland into Chance. And into the second book, I have a lot more in Cleveland. It's a great city, and it's got a lot to it. And I like to mention, I'm very proud to be a part, in Cleveland. Cleveland has a lot of artistic influence, and a lot of people come from Cleveland, in movies and music and
Hmm.
writing and TV. So it's great, and I'm proud to have my city mentioned and things.
Yeah, that was the fun. That is the fun part of writing, but especially when you can throw in some towns people don't know about. Like, but
Yeah,
I've found, I think it's really important for people to pay attention to their surroundings and be influenced by that, because I don't know. I feel like artists sometimes have a vision of what they want to be, and instead of being what they, meant to be, like what's part of their surroundings, like what you grow up around. And I think a lot of people try to cast that off because they have this idea of what they want. And like for me, mentioning stuff about Louisville is always important because that's where I grew up, and it's kind of like you with the Cleveland. So like, when you get your influences, how much of that do you think is what you see yourself as what you want to be versus what you really are? Like, do you kind of take that entire compass into consideration?
um, yes and no. I mean, I mean, growing up in a city, that's how you what you know, and I think with writing, and then what I learned is that there's a lot of you have to do a lot of research, like to make
Mm-hmm.
things real. I mean, we're talking about dialogue and that, but there's a lot of, I mean, she travels a lot in this book, and I really did, do a lot of research when I did this to make it realistic. I mean, literally, there's actually supposedly six entrances to hell, according when I looked it
Yeah.
up, and so and when you're doing the the research, it really does help the writing too, and does spark stuff because they're like there's six entrances, and then I found one, and then finding more. I mean the one entrance that we do use is in Japan, and it really is a real place. There is a monastery where right back inside a volcano that they believe that they help the boot people into the afterlife, and they also have a salon typically, where and I love throwing that in there, that the fact that they're getting massages, massage parlor and stuff by these monks, and I'm like that's hilarious.
So do you kind of, when you write the story, so you when you research, do you find things that kind of just move the story along, or do you sit down, basically pantsing versus plotting? Do you really sit down and have like an idea, like 100% where you want to go, or during the course of your research, you kind of just like leave the door open for when you find things and when you start writing to just kind of let the story write itself and evolve itself?
I'm very pantsing. I'm not. It's like I'm on the journey too. I don't know where it's going. I'm amazed when I go back and I reread things the next day. I'm like, who wrote this?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like I said, I just let it. I just sit here and I write, and I let it where it goes. And if I get stuck, I'm like, well, if they're in here, is there anything going on? Or hey, how about you look for this object? And I learn about the object and all the kind of some just the root the things the rabbit hole you go down, and like it really helps lead into the story go on.
So yeah, so you said something that really got my attention there too when you said going back the next day and reading it and thinking, who wrote this? So like sometimes when I write a story and I finish it and I look through it, because I mean I usually go back and read my stories even after I publish them just to see what I could have done differently or to get an idea of how to be better next time. So when you read your story, do you ever like sit there and think, I can't believe I wrote that? I think it's pretty good, but God, I don't know if I can write something like that again. I don't know if I can do this again. Have you ever felt that way?
Yes, all the time. I mean, every short story I'd write, even writing the book. You like, can I tell the next chapter? It's like, can I make this next chapter is
Mhm.
just as interesting as the chapter before? It's is it going to flow? Is it going to connect? Um, but yeah, it's a challenge. It's great to say, hey, well, where's oh yeah, she's there, and I have to remember to go and go forward, and you just have to figure out how to go forward.
Yeah, it's sometimes when you get like that, I know exactly what you're talking about. Sometimes when you get like that, when you look at that next chapter and you're like, where do I go from here? I think sometimes part of it's because you get stuck in the mind frame of I have to keep going. What do I do next? But then like sometimes when you overthink it, like I was overthinking a chapter I was working on. And I was just driving around places for days thinking about what do I do next. But then like I think if you sometimes just sit down and start writing, then the answer can come to you. Have you ever experienced that? Like if you just say, well, forget it, I'm stuck on this, I'm just going to start writing the next chapter to see what happens, and then actually break out of that, break that barrier.
Yes, very much. Like, I mean, I'll be stuck on that, and I'm like, well, look, this is good for now, and I'll start writing the next chapter, and all of a sudden, yeah, when you're writing the next chapter, um, you just write it, and I'm like, wait, there's the connection. there,
Yeah,
there
I
was the
know.
connection. And I really the new one I'm working on now. I was writing this the first couple chapters. I'm like, where is this going? I'm not when I go rewrite this, I'm gonna have to fix this. This is horrible. And all of a sudden, just recently, I woke up. I'm like, there's the connection. I'm writing this chapter now. I wrote the connection that makes the first chapter make sense. so
Yeah, that's when you really feel like you're doing the right thing. You're like, I'm meant to do this. I actually overcame this. One of our other authors, I saw him post one time something where he's like, if even when the words aren't there, you have to keep hacking away. You have to sit down and keep slinging the words and keep trying to make it. So I think that's really a lot of it. I think we as writers get scared sometimes when the words aren't right there, but they're really just back there. And once you sit down and start just going and just forget about all the worries, you go right through it. And I think he was right. And I think that's how most authors should approach it. Just sit down and do it.
yeah, no, that's why as a writer, there's just so many edits and so many rewrites. I mean, you might, the first you finish the last, the first edit you finish, you're like, hey, it's done. It's nowhere done. That. Oh, I
Mhm.
know not enough words there here, and let me go back and add this, or, I'm you have my wife edits for me, and she can be brutal, which is great. I love her for it because she's the one that looks and goes, Marcus, this makes no sense. And all of a sudden, I have to go back and say, oh, and at least it points out to me where the focus on and how to make this better and uh, create new characters or add new characters and stuff like that.
Yeah, editing's definitely important. If we broke that conversation right now, I'd go way over time. So it's about time to start wrapping this up. So I thank you for coming on, and of
Yeah, man.
course, everybody again, A Chance in Hell, an Ava Edison heist. That's the book by Marcus Cook. It's very good. It's a lot of people like it so far, and if you're into the occult heist, someone going to hell and all that fun stuff. Um, Check it out. You can find it on Amazon. Just check out Nightmare Press, or you can just check out Marcus. You got an author profile, don't you? Do you have an author page? Do you have an author
I have
page?
to create one. I have to create one.
Yeah, it's sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. You could just put your profile on professional mode and just try it that way. Anymore, the algorithms are set up where you have to be on your Facebook page almost all the time trying to get something going on it. So, but again, I thank you for stopping in, and
No problem.
good talking to you. And I look forward to the next Ava Edison chapter.
Good. Thank you.